Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My guest this week is Australian Grandmaster Max Illingworth. He is a coach and author, a blogger. His chess.com blog is instruction rich. It's excellent, and I highly recommend it. I'll put a link in the show notes. That's actually going to be a major part of our discussion today. Max has lots of experience with adult improvers and a sincere interest in helping them get better. So Max, great to see you and welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you very much, Neil.
Yeah, so we're recording this. We actually have an 11-hour time difference between us. You're in Vietnam, so it's 7:30 in the morning here, so I can actually say, good morning, Vietnam, right? I don't know. Robin Williams movie. The youngins may not know that. Anyway, I never thought I'd say that on the podcast. That actually felt really good. So, yeah, just to break the ice, like what's going on in Vietnam? What brings you there as part of your travels?
Well, my wife is from Vietnam. Like, I actually met her through like online dating, and her family is in Vietnam as well. So basically, I'm just staying at a family home in Rak Gia, and just being like a nice opportunity to have a month away and to have a little bit of a holiday for both of us, because it was a very long time actually since we sort of had a holiday in the sense. And just been a really nice opportunity to kind of work and just focus on different things without, let's say, some of the distractions that would be present back in Sydney.
Okay. All right. And just to change gears a little bit, you have an interest in poker now, as many chess players do. I'm just curious how that started and how that's going.
Yeah, actually, it started also in Vietnam in a way, when I was sort of staying here for a couple of years in 2020 and 2021 during the COVID pandemic, as it were. And, there were sort of different games I was kind of looking into a bit. And, poker was one of those ones I was just like playing for fun, just for play money. But then in 2022, about, let's say, May to June or so, I kind of got curious to like actually learn like how to play the game properly, like not just play this a way to pass the time, but to actually try to, learn, okay, how do you play it correctly, as it were. And then when I noticed that even just like studying it just for like 1 or 2 days, I was already better than, the players in Play Money on PokerStars, and better than the players who are in the pub poker, it made me realize that, okay, this is something that if I put a lot of effort into it, I can, not just really enjoy it, but like actually, make money from it as such. And like the story goes on, I'll go from there, but that's really how I kind of was introduced to it in a way, just from exploring it a little bit and just gradually getting more and more into it until it really became like the biggest passion for me.
Now, let's turn to chess. A lot to talk about. To open this part of the discussion, you have, I know, a belief that, correct me if I'm wrong, that chess is a sport. And I was just wondering if you could kind of explain that a little bit. Why do you feel chess should be considered a sport, as many do?
The US, it's considered a sport, and in virtually any sort of developed country, and a lot of not so developed countries as well, it's considered a sport. Like Australia is really a significant outlier in, not considering chess a sport. But really, I think one of the most kind of compelling arguments you can sort of make, there are a lot of them, but like one of the ones that comes to mind is, that it's, basically a very competitive, sort of situation, right? That, you're playing against an opponent and, you're trying to beat them, they're trying to beat you, as it were. And also, if you look at all the counter arguments that some, let's say, ignorant people might make, they might think, well, you're just like moving pieces, like just using your brain, you're not, working your body in a sense. But it goes a lot deeper than that, because when you play chess, especially the high level competitive chess, so you're burning a very large amount of calories. Well, I forget the exact amount, but it's like in the many, many thousands, as it were, for like one like full game of classical chess. So it is like working you very, very hard physically, just in a different way to, let's say, more obviously physical sports. but still like that component is there. And I think that that's a pretty like clear thing. Like I don't think anyone can reasonably argue against that, to say that, chess is not a sport. Like it's just, kind of almost like the law of the universe, let's say, when you consider these sort of data points. And there are probably some others as well, but it's a good summary.
Yeah, and it's true. Some of the best athletes also, they're not necessarily the most athletic in a way, which sounds almost counterintuitive. They just had such a head for the sport. I mean, I what comes to mind as I'm listening to you is Wayne Gretzky, the great hockey player. He really wasn't, I mean, he's considered the greatest, right? But he really wasn't that fast. He wasn't that quick. Self-admittedly, he wasn't the best on one-on-one breakaways, but he had such a head for the game and he knew where the puck was going to be that, that was as much brain as it was physical. So yeah, there's definitely a connection. All right. Now I want to get to the meat of our discussion, which is based on your chess.com blog, which is excellent. I recommend it to everybody. If you are an adult amateur player, which is probably 99% of you listening, I urge you to check it out. And we're going to discuss some of the articles and the themes now. So, Max, what I figured I'd do, I would just mention like the title of some of them, and then I'll let you kind of expand on it, because I think these are fascinating topics that are very instructive. So you have an article, The Qualities of the Most Successful Students. So what makes a successful chess student?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And I think that, to sort of figure out, what makes a successful student, we sort of define like, what is, the definition of success, as it were. And I think that, well, already the student perspective kind of gives a bit of a hint that, if we are kind of learning, if we're learning some new things and if we are really kind of doing the best we can with what we have, then I think that already kind of counts as success, where we're able to kind of detach from like the day-to-day results. And it's actually related to poker as well in a way. That basically we're able to detach from the sort of results. It means that we can sort of focus on the process of learning and also be a lot more resilient, I think, when the setbacks do come, because we're more focused on the process of it. So that to me, what I'd see is sort of like the destination I was aiming towards. And the qualities I find that tend to embody this are going to be things such as like let's say, emotional control of like not having your ego completely wrapped up in chess, as it were, but realizing one of things that you're very passionate about. And yeah, also I guess having that kind of perspective of, asking like, what am I learning from this, rather than ruminating on the, let's say, frustration that might be occurring. Also definitely having that kind of curiosity as well, like looking to try different things, have that courage to maybe try some experiments and sort of see how it goes, rather than just like doing the same thing every single time and expecting some different results. And I think that, just having a open mind is quite useful, and just finally having a really clear sense of direction, I think is quite powerful also, where if you kind of know, okay, like this is the path I'm moving towards and this is how like what I'm doing fits with the overall direction I'm taking, I think that is, really going to be a big part. And I think the filing as well, it's good to mention, is just to be sort of enjoying the process, to have like honor the struggle and just, sort of, have fun as much as you can. I think you'll kind of learn better that way if you are really sort of enjoying the process and being very in the moment, as it were.
Yeah, so a focus on learning and the process more than an obsession with the rating.
Yeah, like, I mean, the Stoics would talk about it as like, focus on the things you can control, essentially.
Yeah, okay. Now, in your blog, you talk about the importance of unlearning chess for adult improvers. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So by unlearning, I sort of mean kind of basically putting your assumptions sort of to one side, where I think one of the most common mistakes, let's say, one can make when learning any sort of skill is to assume, oh, I know this already. And so like your brain is automatically kind of disengages in a way. So unlearning is sort of realizing that the things that you kind of know about something may not necessarily be true, or they may not necessarily be relevant for this particular situation. Like a chess example would be like maybe when you were a young kid, like you learned that double pawns are a weakness because they make your structure less flexible, and maybe the pawns can be attacked and so forth. And then when you get a bit stronger, you realize that, well, actually, if you have like a rook's pawn recapturing toward the center, well, your pawns are still in the same pawn island and, not creating additional weaknesses. And it actually ends up being a slight strength overall to have this double pawn. Just kind of a example of how that reframing could work in practice. And yeah, just kind of not getting too fixated on any one thing as well. Like, for example, what you'll see a lot of younger players do especially is that they will get so fixated on solving tactics puzzles because, it's fun and gives some adrenaline rush that then they play it because, they've been only solving tactics puzzles for their training. I just think every chess position is a tactics puzzle and kind of lose the right balance. So it manifests in a lot of different ways. I think with these examples, yeah, it's basically staying kind of flexible in your mindset about chess and realize like there's always something new that you can learn. And even the things you already know, there's always a new layer of meaning you can sort of add and a layer of understanding on top of it.
I have one follow-up there. I like what you said about tactics because I agree with you 100%. A lot of players, they'll do these tactical puzzles and then they go to their OTB tournament and there's no transference because like you said, probably 80% of positions maybe, there's no immediate tactical shot. Now, what is your stance on tactics as far as players rated under 1800? Because there's sort of this theory that's floating out there that, well, if you're under 1800, just do tactics. Don't worry about anything. Just tactics all the way. Like, what's your take on that belief?
I mean, I do think tactics are definitely like very important. I mean, they are going to decide like the majority of games, probably up to 400, like in some way or another, especially if you include like calculation aspects with the definition of tactics as Noel Studer likes to do. But I think that, yeah, the way I would look at it is to kind of put it all together in perspective and realize, for one thing that, tactics aren't just going to come like out of nowhere, that they do kind of flow from a good position in a sense. And yeah, also to kind of realize that, well, okay, step one, when your calculation, of course, to, look for the checks and the captures and the threatening moves, for the opponent as well as for you. But to realize that there is a step beyond that, if the forcing moves aren't working, well, that's where the more positional and strategic questions come a lot more into play. I mean, one thing I've kind of written about a lot, like I'm not sure if it was in the list of blogs you showed me before, but I know I've often talked about the importance of solving the tactics puzzles by theme, and that allows you to kind of spend more time focusing on, let's say, other aspects in your games, because you'll just be seeing the tactics a lot faster if you've drilled the theme to the point where it's just at an unconscious level of competence. So at least that's why I found this kind of like worked for me and worked for, my students in any case.
Now, you also mention quote unquote potholes and detours on the road to getting a 1600 rating. What are these potholes and detours you're referring to?
Yeah, this is a great question because I think that, well, it's all true that like every chess player's journey is a little bit different in some ways, but that kind of the higher the rating you get to, the more, let's say, variance there is in, how that journey might be different. Whereas kind of the lower the rating, you find the more similar chess players' problems tend to be. So it's kind of interesting because even at like a very high level, I noticed that like some players like who are close to master have similar weaknesses to the beginners, just in a slightly different way as such, like a different level of it. But going back to the question of the potholes and the detours, I think one of the main ones that kind of comes up for players below 1600 is just kind of getting sort of confused in a way. Like, I guess the poker metaphor would be like studying lots and lots of game theory optimal play when you sort of are not at a level where you're going to really be able to process it or apply it effectively because it's way too complex, like for a human to follow. I guess a chess equivalent would be like just trying to play everything like an engine without the sort of background understanding this work. So that'd be like, but I guess the other way you can look at it in terms of the direction is actually the aspect of like trying to learn from a lot of different people at once, like trying to a lot of people's different sort of ideas and suggestions rather than kind of finding one and just sort of sticking with it long enough to kind of get the results in a way. And probably one of the challenges also, I think, going on a lot of, let's say, grandmasters probably don't remember like what it's like when they were below 1600, whereas I'm kind of lucky to have this sort of eidetic memory of sorts where I do still remember what it was like what challenges I was facing, what questions I had, and like what problems I was going through at pretty much every stage of my chess career. Like even when I was very, very young, like I still remember, for example, reading this book by Dan Heisman, like everyone's second chess book. And I think I must be like 9 years old or something when I read it for the first time. But I read it like quite a few times and actually kind of shaped quite a bit of my, let's say, understanding of like how beginners think and how to kind of coach them. But, I started reading it just to make sure I wasn't making the mistakes that, other players my rating below were making. So I guess that's like one example. Like it's a question I could really answer quite a lot because I ended up doing like a 1 hour webinar just on this whole topic. But if there was one I had to kind of single out as sort of the biggest one, I find it's, just sort of this kind of overwhelm and lack of direction from, everyone giving their advice and kind of not knowing what's going to be actually relevant, like what's most relevant to you at your current stage in terms of, what's going to have the biggest impact on your results at the end of the day.
Yeah, so you need to focus specifically on what is holding you back rather than these sort of generic ideas of like everybody should do this to improve, because it's not, in other words, there's no real cookie cutter solution, correct?
I mean, it's kind of interesting how it works because on the one hand, you could sort of say that, well, these are things going to be most relevant typically at a given level of play as such. But at the same time, it's also true that, you sort of have to figure out something like that, to kind of just like stick with in a way. Because like I sort of have like so much experience like with, observing like how, players at different levels think, and probably the fact that I play like 50,000 or so unrated like Blitz and bullet games on chess.com against players of all levels. This is probably why I have this like really good understanding of the problems players face each rank level, where I can just look at the rank and say, okay, like these are the typical weaknesses they have, and this is the difference between where they're at and like the next level I want to get to. But the thing is that you kind of, I think, need like a coach to sort of have that understanding of, okay, this is what you're missing, like based on your specific game analysis, but also the next level above that is, okay, these are the typical mistakes that your opponents are making. So if you're able to kind of stop making the biggest mistakes that are deciding the most of your games, and you're also able to exploit your opponent's biggest mistakes that are deciding the majority of your games, then that's what's going to allow you to get to the next level. So I kind of think of almost like sort of like exploited poker in a way, but for chess, where you sort of figure out, okay, what are the things that are deciding most of my games? And, a low level will be as simple as who blunders the least pieces and who takes the most pieces of the other player as such. That's kind of like a simple example where, it doesn't make sense to focus on, just solving advanced tactics if you're not even keeping your pieces safe. It's like just get building those building blocks to get the skill you need to get in order to jump to the next level. I could say more, but like that's the general idea of like breaking it down in a sense.
Right. Like there's no scaffolding or sequence. People are just sort of randomly studying different things, and they're not addressing the first thing before they move on to the next thing, right? That type of learning process.
Yeah, like it's definitely, I think, for a lot of people often very sort of chaotic and just moving back and forth, or also focusing a lot, but focus on something that might only be relevant when you get to maybe like 1800 or something like this.
Yeah. The other thing too, and I've spoken about this before in the podcast, for someone looking to get better, let's say for an adult improver who is just discovering the game or maybe rediscovering the game, a lot of adults, they played when they were younger, kind of stepped away from it, and now with the boom, they're getting into it again. There's just so much material now. It's just crazy between the books and the videos and the courses that it's very easy to get overwhelmed, and they end up choosing the wrong things because, well, this person's studying it, but it may not be appropriate for them. I'm just wondering if you're seeing that with some of your students.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I feel like because of my students, it's probably a little bit of a smaller sample size that, may not necessarily be indicative of the general population, let's say, of podcast listeners or adult improvers overall. But because like they often like have a bit more time maybe to spend on their chess in case of my students, and maybe a little bit more commitment in some respects. But at the same time, I think that, it's probably fair to say that, there's just a sort of confusion sometimes of, just having too much information, whereas, 30, 40 years ago is the opposite problem of kind of not enough resources out there in a sense. So that's definitely true. And I think that, the more you can kind of simplify the process, then the better it's probably going to be for you in general.
You speak about the invisible assassin killing your chess improvement. I really like that title. That's one of your articles. So what is this invisible assassin killing people's chess improvement? I'd love to hear about that.
It's kind of interesting because I think at the time I thought, okay, there's this one answer that is just like really obvious. But now that I look at now, I think there's actually several different paths you could take with this. Like one could be, the one we just talked about a lack of direction, or perhaps on another perspective, it could also be, sort of learning from someone like who's giving some advice for you, but who doesn't really understand the actual challenges you're facing in your games, let's say, where it's like too separated from it somehow. But I think at the time I was sort of thinking about kind of from mindset, I think it was the perspective I was looking at with that. And I think that one of the ones I was probably thinking of at the time was about the topic of kind of focusing too much on your results, like getting so caught up in it, you sort of kind of give up before you can realize all of the results in a sense. So that's like one it could definitely be. It's kind of funny, like sounds like it was a while ago since I wrote something, and my ideas kind of like evolved so much. It sounds like I forget exactly the thing that I kind of wrote as such. Okay, probably in the past I remembered it all very well, but lately it sounds like the poke of like pushes a little bit of the chest up in the past out of the brain in a funny way. But yeah, you could say like there's definitely a few like invisible assassins that could be kind of killing your chess improvement. I mean, it could also been writing about the thing of like just always playing forcing moves and never kind of looking for alternatives in the position beyond the forcing moves, which relates back to what I talked about with the tactics. So there could actually be a lot of invisible assassins killing your chess improvement. And I mean, it's quite possible like what I wrote in the blog was something completely different to all things I shared, but it gives the idea, that it may not just be one thing. It can be one of the many things actually.
Right. Well, you speak about attention as the most valuable resource. Is it like, how is that? I guess many amateurs, they're getting distracted or they're not focused. I guess it's kind of like what you said. They're focused on other things rather than, I guess, the position in front of them. You talk about lack of attention in chess and focusing on the wrong things. That's kind of what you emphasize. And I don't know, maybe you can just talk about that a little bit, like how attention is a problem for improvers.
Yeah, sure. So I think, so now I kind of remembering, I was sort of looking at from the context of attention in terms of like focusing on, what you focus on in your chess training as such. I kind of mentioned a couple examples before, but I think it's, just sort of not really taking an inventory, let's say, where you look at your games and sort of see, okay, like what is it that kind of mainly decided this game or that game, and just kind of getting a bunch of data, figuring out, okay, how many times am I, let's say even take the games that you lost, like how many times am I losing, like percentage-wise because of missing a tactic or, just not having a sense of danger and coming under a decisive attack on the king, or how many times, just getting strategically outplayed due to, not staying the rising position, or, how many times you were playing fine up to the end game, then it all just suddenly fell apart, or, how many times is it because you, got into time trouble and, just started to blunder with like not enough time in a very complicated position. But that's really what it comes down to, is basically being able to sort of diagnose kind of what's are the most important things to focus on, and then just really focusing on those things. Like good example, I guess, one thing that kind of ties a lot of the things I mentioned is sort of the idea of the pattern recognition. And you're going to kind of retain things a lot better if you actually learn from your own experiences. It's one reason why in my lessons I really make sure that I can include a lot of puzzles, like both for them to solve in the lesson and also puzzles to solve outside of the lesson, because that really helps to make like not just, me talking about something, but really make like a part of, who they are and who they are as a player, as it were. So that's kind of what it sort of relates to, sort of finding the things that really matter for your game at your level. And then from there, basically, just spending most of your time on those things. And finding out sometimes it's as simple as just, kind of learning something and then just playing it in your games and then analyzing and seeing how it turned out. Just having that continual feedback loop. Like sometimes it's just as simple as that, and kind of just keep on like trying to make it work in your games until you see that kind of improvement in a way.
Yeah, you talk about resourcefulness as well, which I think is something that is not discussed as much for improvers. Everything is always like theory, learn this. But sometimes you face a position where your sort of bag of tricks is not going to help you and you kind of have to find the solution on your own. So is that something I guess you emphasize with your students? Like, what are your thoughts about resourcefulness and how amateurs can use that in their games?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, actually. So with the whole subject of resourcefulness, I think when I wrote the post, I might have also been referred to the context of like finding ways to improve, like even without like spending a lot of money is the same one thing I was thinking of at the time. But for the sake like how to defend very well, which I think is really what it comes down to. The thing with defense is that on the one hand, it's one of the hardest things I think to do well as a player because naturally we're much more fixated on our own ideas than on the opponent's ideas. And yet if you sort of look at what distinguishes, let's say, very good players from truly great players, usually it comes down to how well they defend in very difficult positions. And when someone kind of has this sort of epiphany or either figuring out themselves or someone told them, then it kind of leads to defense from being maybe a sort of frustrating or kind of boring topic to side being like, okay, defense is, what can win championships to, take a sports quote as it were. But yeah, also like if you think about it, when you think of defense, it's also kind of an extension of attacking play, which is actually one reason why with the next course that I'm creating just for my private students, as it were, I'm focusing on attacking play because I realized that if I teach my students how to attack very, very well and to have a very good feel for the initiative that comes, through the, going through a lot of great games by Greco, very well explained, or by Morpheus is another good example. Once you go for those games, it becomes like an automatic part of your play. Then the defensive skill also becomes a lot easier when you already know how to attack because you already know like what you're looking for just from the opponent's point of view. And it's also the reason why in the lessons, like my set tactics puzzle, I do often set puzzle like how to anticipate the opponent's tactic, like how to not fall into their tactic or how to correctly identify the opponent's threat and correctly respond to it. Because the kind of intuitive response most people have is, oh, my opponent made a threat. How do we defend against it? Like, say, if the threat is, their knight can take your queen, most people automatically think, okay, how do we move the queen away to safety? Whereas the more advanced players kind of gone through that process of, learning how to attack effectively and defend more resourcefully, their first thought's going to be, well, can we just ignore the attack on the queen altogether and make a stronger threat? And then the second thought might be, well, maybe we can take the knight with one of our pieces as such, to give a very simple example. But like for them, like moving the queen is like sort of one of the last things on their mind rather than the first, as it were.
Now you have this theory that you wrote about. Very, very curious about this. You say 99% of YouTube videos may not be helping you, which is interesting because YouTube chess videos, a lot of people use those. I'm curious why you feel that way.
After me, sometimes when I was writing some of these things, it was when I was maybe being a little bit more cynically about chess improvement, perhaps, than I do at the moment with different resources. But I do think that with YouTube I sort of found it with poker as well. Like I sort of watch a lot of YouTube videos with poker, but they weren't really that many I felt really improved my game significantly because often just very kind of surface level, or it just wasn't really kind of targeted, so I'd say specifically at me, as it were. And I think that probably the biggest limitation of them, and isn't just for YouTube, but it kind of applies for a lot of resources in general, is that basically YouTube is generally a very passive way to kind of learn something. Because you think about like YouTube content, like if you look at what's optimized, it's not optimized based on how well you're going to learn from it. It's optimized based on how entertaining is it, like how long are you going to kind of watch it. And for most people, it's much easier to focus up on something for longer where you, let's say, are just being entertained and don't have to use your brain than something where you do have to work quite hard. And that's why rarely you find someone like me who's the opposite, where I disengage very quickly if I'm not using my brain. Like I need to be calculating and working it out, or I just disengage super fast. But most people are not like that, I think. So that's kind of the thing with YouTube. Like it's just sort of, it's not geared towards kind of learning in terms of the algorithm in a sense. It's not to say there aren't YouTube channels that do try to focus a bit more on the learning, but I do find that even then again, it's often just like very kind of generalized. And to be clear, like this even is true like of my videos as well. Like, I mean, if I was people ask me like, oh, what's the best way to improve your chess? Like, I mean, my YouTube content is free, but it's not necessarily going to be the most effective because like when I do a candidate's recap, like I'm sort of, just not necessarily like focused in terms of, okay, this is what you need to focus on to improve your chess. Like it's just more like, showing, okay, this is sort of a topical thing that, people are kind of interested in. So maybe it's a way to, get people into it and then maybe they'll, learn from some of my other stuff. So in the future, more like, let's say, a lead magnet than like the final solution, if that makes sense. And that's probably true for a lot of other like YouTubers as well who are kind of doing it in, let's say, the objectively smartest way from a marketing point of view. That they're focused on like the entertainment engagement and know that, the people are going to learn, they're still going to like learn in some way, but it's not like the purpose of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. And I do enjoy YouTube videos, but it's definitely can't be the basis of your learning. And like you said, there is something passive about it where it's easy to sort of drift. But then I think it's also the way people use it because it's sort of passive to begin with. But then many people, now personally, I don't do this. I'm very anti-multitasking, but a lot of people, they have a YouTube video on, even a chess video. They have their email open in another tab, probably a Netflix show in another tab. They're on the phone. They're doing all. So of course, learning isn't going to take place. Like if I look at a YouTube chess video, I do try to just do that and really focus on that, maybe pause it and go back. So I try to at least get the maximum instruction out of it. I also agree with what you said about the production values because everyone's just with the algorithm and wants likes and clicks, and they're sometimes focusing more on their thumbnail than the video itself, right? And like you said, there is sort of a production and entertainment value to it that can distract from the actual content. And I mean, and I'll say this, I think even in chess, I think this is true for a lot of YouTubers in general, not just chess YouTubers, although they're included, which is they're getting a lot of followers and a lot of likes and a lot of views for reasons that have little to do with the content. I don't know, does that make sense? Like there's something else about them that is bringing people to their channel, and as a result, the content is almost secondary. I don't know. Would you agree with that, Max?
Yeah, like I think that at least in terms of initial engagement, then sure, I think it's probably fair to say that the way someone delivers the content is probably more important than the actual content itself. Because it's I feel just be more engaged to a certain kind of style. Because I mean, I was in Postmasters in the past, like when I was in my like late teens to early 20s for a bit. So I kind of have an idea of, like what some of the, let's say, techniques are for really keeping someone's attention in that respect.
Yeah, because personally, I know it's going to sound a little cynical, but there are some chess YouTube channels, and this is true for both title players and amateurs. There are some that I think are outstanding and are shockingly underrated. And then there are some that seem to have a zillion followers. And I'm like, really? Like, what am I missing here? Like, I just, it's very interesting, but I feel, I don't want to say I feel bad, but I find it disturbing that the channels that I think are really excellent, I'm not going to mention names, but there are just some excellent channels out there that unfortunately are just very underrated. And I think the opposite is true as well. So it's an interesting platform, shall we say, for chess instruction. So yeah, interesting. Changing gears a little bit, you speak about the role of positive reinforcement in chess improvement. And I think that's important as well. I think it's an important topic that is not discussed as much. So could you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So something quite sure about it with chess. Like I might actually share kind of how how this topic came up, because it actually came up from, let's say, in real life stuff, not really so related to chess, but one of like the big challenges I was kind of facing sort of from in like 2022 and 2023 was kind of this feeling of my family like not really supporting like the direction that I kind of want to go in, like first with, this big like group coaching program that I was doing in 2022. And then later also with like, wanting to focus on poker as such. So that's kind of what sort of started the kind of idea of doing a post of, okay, let's just not make it just a post where it sounds like I'm just complaining about, circuits in our life that, are in my control to some extent, but to actually make it like very action-based, like really analyze it in a lot of detail. I think I wrote this post around the time actually when I started to kind of use ChatGPT, like not like just to write the post, but kind of to generate ideas and then for me to kind of expand on them and share my own experiences. Because people probably like will notice that shift to my writing style, like around the end of 2023, where like sort of less grammatical errors and maybe a slightly less conversational tone, but maybe also a little bit more compelling and a bit more of a detailed layer of analysis, let's say. But yeah, going back to the topic of the role of like the positive reinforcement, I mean, a lot of I think really just it comes down to basically the pattern of how a habit basically develops. That this is sort of testing my memory a little bit because I normally when I'm writing I just look it up to make sure I remembered it. But basically the first idea is that you sort of have the sort of cue, like something that sort of is a cue for you to kind of do the behavior. And then you sort of have the craving, like of the craving, okay, now I really want to sort of do this. And the old theory about habit development was that, well, you do have the craving so you can get the reward, which is not technically incorrect, but is actually the element of after craving, you're going to have the routine, sort of like, Pavlov's dogs, this experiment, where you basically are doing the routine because that satisfies the craving to get the reward based on your past experience. So the reward is the fourth part of it. But it also works, for negative things like, say, if you're continuing doing something, but you're getting a outcome that doesn't feel like right to you in a way, and that's being reinforced, then it will sort of over time demotivate you from doing things that need to get done. And that maybe is one reason perhaps why my poker study was like really inconsistent in Sydney, but has been like relatively more consistent here in Vietnam. But yeah, like that's sort of, I mean, you can go on this topic, I think, on a lot of different levels, but I think that's the simplest way to express it, that basically you're wanting to set yourself up so that for the things you want to do, that you've got that clear cue, craving, routine, reward, where you're actually like feeling some sort of benefit, like just mentally from what you're kind of doing, like even if the results aren't kind of there automatically, it kind of gives you more incentive to do something that, yeah, it takes a bit more discipline perhaps, and where you're not going to see the benefits overnight or maybe even a week or a month, let's say, but it'd be a more long-term thing, perhaps a more compounding effect, as it were.
Now, I have one more topic I want to discuss, if that's okay, and then I have some Q&A from our listeners, some questions. So in your blog, you speak about losing motivation and also coming back from a slump or a downswing. Because I know, just looking at things that people post online, the chess Twitter scene is, I'm just laughing because I'm not, the analogy I use, like social media for me is like robbing a bank. I'm like in and out, I just kind of, whatever, I'm posting this. All right, see you later. Let me just check any notifications. Okay, I'm out. I feel like if I'm on social media more than 10 minutes at a time, I have to like take a shower or something. I don't know. That's just me. Cause I don't know. I just feel it can easily turn into a toxic time waster. Like I like social media, but I don't at the same time. So it's, but as someone, it's like I host a podcast, I run a chess club, I like to be involved in the scene. You kind of have to be connected to social media, but I don't know. It's like a love-hate thing for me. Anyway, enough about my issues. But one of the things you see a lot of people post on Twitter or Facebook is when they're in a slump or having a downswing and they lose motivation. So I was hoping you could share some thoughts on that, about coming back from a slump and how to deal with those times when it's just not happening despite your best efforts.
Yeah, sure. And, I think that because I sort of see a lot of similarities between this and poker, even in a way, because even though with poker, of course, there's less element of control that, with chess, you kind of can see very clear, okay, I could have played it better. Like, if I play this move, I don't lose the game, or if I play a move to win the game. So it's kind of different to poker, where you could do everything perfectly and still lose in a way. But at the same time, there is still this sort of natural variance sort of within chess, where maybe you happen to play an opponent just when they happen to be in really great form, and maybe tomorrow they play like 200 points below their rating, instead of 200 points above their rating. And, it can be the case for you as well. Like maybe one day you just feel really good, like you're seeing everything and you're, plowing 200 points above your rating. Then the next you're playing when you're like really tired and just like not feeling it at all. And then maybe emotions get the better of your prefrontal cortex shuts down and you play like 200 points worse than your rating. And it's also like if you take like juniors long, is kind of naturally quite inconsistent, because they're still processing a lot of different things in a sense. But yeah, that's sort of thing to realize. I think when you realize that you are going to have bad days, you kind of just accept it as part of the process. That self point makes it a lot easier to deal with them. And I think that can also help, can be sort of, and it's something that's borrowed very directly from poker, because it was Jared Tendler who originally developed this idea, I believe. But sort of this idea of like injecting logic, basically, where you can sort of say, well, okay, like, well, rather than, focusing on like, how this is like such a bad beat, like how could I lose this player, or like how could I not win this position, to kind of ask some more supportive kind of questions like, okay, well, what is it that I need to do better next time to handle these decisions better in the future? Or and another one I've kind of shared with some private students that's really been quite useful, sort of for kind of dealing like in the moment when you're sort of feeling let's say feelings of tilt start to come up as such. What Daniel Negreanu sort of says that he likes to do to deal with this. Of course, Daniel Negreanu being one of the greatest poker players of all time. But basically what he does is step one is he just kind of just imagines letting all the emotion out. Like he doesn't actually do it at the poker tables like, say, Phil Hellmuth does, but he just imagines himself as like acting it all out, like letting you kind of force just flow for a moment. And then in step two is he kind of observes like, okay, like how does it actually feel in my body, as it were? Like what's the physical sensations? So it's a kind of mindfulness practice of sorts. And then step three is he kind of like just sort of asks, well, what is it that I kind of want to be feeling in this moment? And kind of focusing a bit more on that as such. And then step one, he kind of has done like a sort of a power happy where he just kind of like clicks his fingers. And then immediately that just brings him right back into focusing on the action at the poker table and just forgetting everything else that kind of happened. And, other people who can find their own, let's say, routine to kind of work them in their own version. But I think that's an example of something where if you have something like this and you just practice it so long that it just create that automatic Pavlovian reaction, it can sort of snap you out of the tilt in a way. And that can start to help in a moment where maybe injecting logic is, maybe it's not going to work so well in that moment if you haven't practiced it so much. But like the sooner you can recognize the tilt, the sooner you can kind of do something about it and choose something kind of different in a way to like the emotional response. Whereas if you haven't like practiced dealing with it, or if you just let it build up for too long, then yeah, it might reach a point of no return for you in some way. And I mean, that's just, I guess, one aspect of it. I mean, is I guess it answers the general question of, what it means from a long-term improvement perspective. But yeah, for the more long-term, like that gives you more space to kind of like inject logic and look at things a bit more objectively. And to be fair, like if you also have like a coach, or if you have a like study group as well, like that also can help to provide some support, when you feel that you're not on this journey alone. So I know this made a big difference to me when I was like studying poker. Like I definitely, practice a lot more and worked a lot harder when there are people to talk about it with that, they're all having downswings. Like it wasn't just me in a sense.
I have a follow-up question, and this is something I want to talk about in a future episode. It's a topic I like. If someone's really in a slump, like the tournament results just aren't happening, do you believe they should take a break, like just step away from and come back fresh, or should you play through it? Because I have very mixed feelings. I'm kind of torn. I think there's arguments for both sides. I'm wondering if you have a stance on that, like take a break or just play through it.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the situation and on the person. Because like the first thing is that everyone like has a different sort of pain tolerance. Like I think for me, like my pain tolerance for bad results is actually probably lower, I think, than most other chess players. Like if I just have like bad results long enough, I'll just feel like quitting chess altogether. And well, like I actually retired from playing tournaments like in early 2019. And part of it was like also like a feeling of just like not enjoying chess anymore, like in terms of playing it in classical, and just not feeling like any progress in my results for a long time despite working really hard. So I think that's kind of the situation you're wanting to try to avoid, where like you push so hard you just feel you have nothing left, that, and sort of lose kind of hope in the sense. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting question, like what is the ideal point to sort of like take that break? And one thing I think can kind of help make that decision is to realize that in many cases, like taking a break is actually the best thing you can do for your improvement. Because what will often happen is like when you're on that break, you're just giving your brain that space to kind of absorb all the lessons you've kind of learned and to make that sort of big improvement. And, that's for me with different skills, like my biggest improvement often happened actually right after taking a break, after like working on something quite hard. So I think that if you look at breaks like not as missing out an opportunity to improve, but actually a integral part of the improvement process in the long term, like from a kind of high performance perspective, which I think was covered in the high performance training for sports, this very old book by James Lowe that I read like 6 years ago. Like he kind of mentions like a similar sort of point that you need to take breaks in order to be at your highest performance, but it's actually true for learning as well as for the tournament performance. So as I say, like kind of figure out what sort of spacing of breaks kind of works for you from your own experience and practice. And then just kind of like trust and just kind of continue with that. And, that may help you to reduce the frustration and actually to improve faster by just like avoiding the burnout and, just giving your brain the space to absorb some of the things that you've been learning in a sense.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Max, I want to do one more segment. I want to do a Q&A. That's okay. We have some questions from our listeners. Here we go. So our first question is from Steve Kaziel. Steve, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. I apologize if I'm not. At Steve Kaziel from Twitter or X. And he says, primarily, I play games classical, analyze them, practice tactics, to improve my game. I do this for about 90% of the time I have for chess. Recently, I started playing Chess 960 for the other 10% of my practice time. I think it's more productive than Blitz. What's your take? Now, before you answer, for those who don't know, Chess 960 or Fisher Random Chess, that's where you basically rearrange the back row of the pieces before the game, right? So the pawns stay intact, but your back row with, your rooks, bishops, king, those are randomly placed. And that's what Chess 960 is. And so he's saying he started playing that for 10% of his practice time. He thinks that Chess 960 is more productive than Blitz. And he's asking, Max, what your take is on that.
I guess it's like to clarify the question, like I think the context is saying that it's better like to play Chess 960 like at a rapid or classical time control is to play Blitz as sort of like the, I guess, argument sort of being made, like Blitz at classical, with the classical sort of starting position. And I mean, I think like when it comes to variants, like, Chess 960 isn't really a variant if you think about it. Like it's just the, normal chess with the pieces on different starting squares. And I didn't really thought like too deeply about it. I just feel like, it's sort of more a question of like Blitz versus rapid or classical rather than, let's say, Blitz versus Chess 960. Like it's sort of the framing of the question, I guess, maybe slightly curious to me. But yeah, I think that in general, like I would say that, playing longer time controls, like it has the advantage to really get to practice like different thinking techniques that you're working on improving, because it's kind of one thing actually I probably should have talked about a little bit more in terms of the questions. Like my coaching approach definitely is a lot more focused on, developing thinking techniques, just continuing to practice them until they kind of become an automatic part of your game. And I think in terms of Chess 960, a nice thing about it is it kind of forces you to practice those thinking techniques earlier. Like you're not going to just be stuck in the safety blanket of theory and, in a kind of place where you're never sort of unlearning. So I think that as an unlearning tool, yeah, Chess 960 can have some merit. I think like ultimately, if you enjoy playing Chess 960, like I see no reason kind of not to go for it. But yeah, like in terms of like which is better, I think that, they both have their kind of place. That sort of one of these things that, yeah, whether you play like Chess 960 or play like normal chess in the time, yeah, it's probably more of a matter of taste where, of course, the nice thing about Blitz is you can sort of get a lot of experience more quickly with your different openings as such. But yeah, I don't think it's sort of a right or wrong question per se.
Next question is from our Long Island Chess Club Facebook page from Frank, starts with an F. And this is what he says. It's about speed chess. He says, for some time, I have participated in many speed chess events, some casual and some tournaments. Because of my current schedule, it's pretty much all I do, 5-minute games over the board and online. Over the last year, I have noted extreme rating changes online, which see as much as a 200-point drop and then increase. In addition, my OTB play also has its ups and downs. I do study from books and puzzles. However, given the current circumstances, what would you recommend in order to stay consistent? I have been playing chess OTB now for the last 20 years, mostly in the streets and venues of New York City. I have beaten masters, but just the same have lost to 1,400 rated players. Perhaps at your level and expertise, you may have some advice on how to remain on top of my game. In my travels and conversation with other players of the same strength and interest, I have noted this to be common amongst all street players like myself. Appreciate some insight on this. Thank you.
Yeah, there's actually a lot of perspectives that one can answer this question. Like, definitely, I think that it's true that you often do see a kind of inconsistency in it. It took me a while to kind of figure out why, because there was a time where I had thought it was predominantly psychological. But I think in like 2022, it suddenly dawned on me that the reason that people often have inconsistency is just because their skill development in chess is just so imbalanced, where, for example, they might have, say, a whole book on isolated pawn position. So if they get an isolated pawn position, they're saying like 300 points stronger or something, because they just know all the patterns automatically as such from how they've kind of gone through it. But then you give them like, a Carlsbad pawn structure, and then they've never looked at it in their life, and they're saying like 300 points weaker. Okay, as a sort of like, that's doing a little bit from the question maybe, but I think that there can be a lot of different causes of inconsistency. Like there's the chess skill aspect as well as the more obvious psychological aspect that people tend to focus on. But I think that the chess skill aspect, like we already kind of talked about, how you can, like how like train, like when you focus on the key stuff, like when you go, okay, this is what's deciding most of my games, and you turn that weakness into a strength, like that kind of deals with it in a way. So that's why I'm going to kind of focus more on, let's say, the like performance kind of aspects of it in the rest of the answer. So basically, like kind of this something already has been talked about a fair bit on the chess mood blogs, that if you just simply play like when you're kind of feeling well as such, like when you're feeling good, then that itself is going to help. Like if you just don't play when you're tired, then it makes things a lot easier. But it also can have its limitations, where maybe, you have already entered form, like you already paid the entry fee, and, you don't know whether you're going to be tired or not, because, today still didn't happen in a way. So that's why I think that, probably my experience, like a certified high performance coach, kind of give me some insights, like on, how to improve one's performance, as it were, on a general level. And I think that, there are sort of 6 key indicators of high performance. Like it's not really the place to go in full detail, but I'll say that the most significant one, I think, especially for chess, is that of energy. Like actually, it was my first private chess coach, John Paul Wallace, who kind of made the point, like energy is the most important thing for your performance in tournaments. And so if you sort of break down energy, like it's really, like at the simplest level, it just comes down to, how well have you slept, how well have you eaten, and, how, briskly or effectively have you exercised in a sense. So I think that like even just something as simple as making sure that, you're sleeping well and you're, eating well, in good quantities, and also, make sure you're getting that exercise in each day. Like I think that in itself can deal with a lot of the inconsistencies, because I know for myself, like those were the things that were really going well for me when I was like playing really well online. And let's say if I didn't like exercise for a bit, like if it habit slipped a bit, like as in Vietnam, like my level seemed to just go down like 100 points very quickly in a way. It was like not quite as sharp. Or like if I started to like eat some of the wrong food, like eating, too many pizzas or having too much, iced tea as such. Again, I know it's like my level seemed to go down like 100 points or so from that. So I think there's some similar things you can kind of try to just figure out, what is kind of limiting your energy, and just, figure it out like through your own experimentation, kind of like what Tim Ferriss does, where he calls himself the human guinea pig. Like you can sort of do something similar to that for yourself with chess. I probably was too obsessive about that almost in the past, but yeah, it's something that I think people can give more attention to, and it'll probably help quite a lot.
See, now you said some interesting things, a lot to unpack there. I agree completely. In fact, I think it's a very powerful statement that the day of a tournament game, the amount of sleep you got the night before and how energized you feel is probably the most important. Absolutely. Like you said, it's the most important. I think that can't be overemphasized, more than how much chess you studied that week. Because if you're tired and you're just not feeling it, you might as well pack it in. And I know it's tough because, as a club player, you're playing at night. It's after a full day of work. It's not easy. And you can almost feel like it's almost like you're playing the game and moving the pieces and you're not at your best. Like it's kind of it's a very unsettling feeling. So I agree there. Now, with Frank's email, he's talking about speed chess. I was thinking the fact that he has so much variance, like his rating goes up 200, down 200, up 200. I just think that's because it is speed chess. I just think that's inherent in speed chess for most players. When you play a lot of speed chess, you're going to have that variance. And in a lot of ways, playing speed chess is almost an equalizer for lower rated opponents. Like in other words, they say if you're playing a much higher rated player, you may have a better chance beating them in speed chess because it's just blunders might be more common. I don't know if you agree, but I think there's a grain of truth to that because, in a slower time control, the better player is going to have the time to find the right move and use that skill. But if his clock is ticking, if he's in time pressure, you might be able to catch him. So I just think his rating variance is from the fact that that's just inherent in speed chess. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a good point as well. Yeah, that, with speed chess that, like your form is going to be fluctuating kind of a lot more and the same kind of for the opponent. So yeah, I mean, I think it's saying like kind of just having big swings is just like kind of normal where if it's all compared to poker, like I guess classical chess is kind of like, let's say, playing cash games and, playing, this sort of speed chess kind of more like playing like massive multi-table tournaments where it might take a very long time before you get like the big score that does a massive boost your bankroll, and you'll probably be losing a very long time, let's say, before you finally beat the big win if you're playing like 1,000 field events. Where if you're playing like, small like 8-handed cash games, you just like wait forever for the right hand and the right opportunity in a sense to come up, then yeah, you're just going to like have much more stable results. So yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say in short.
Max Illingworth, Grandmaster Max Illingworth, great discussion, a lot to think about, some very instructive ideas. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thank you. And for those of you listening at home, as always, we really appreciate it. And I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.